Hey, what's going on everybody? My name is Tedro here for ADSR, and we're working in partnership with Serato to teach producers how to make music in Serato Studio. We've done 3 videos already on how to make specific genres of music in Serato Studio, and today we're going to be looking at how to create melodies in Serato Studio. If you're interested in the workflow you see here today, you can take a look at the link in the description, which can get you an exclusive free offer from Serato Studio and ADSR. I'm going to do my best to explain how to write good melodies even to producers that are just starting out and have maybe not had too much experience with music making software. So without further ado, let's talk about how to make some melodies. So before we even get into starting to write our melody, I want to talk about the play in key feature in Serato Studio. So it's this little button here that's on your instruments that you can toggle on, and all of the notes you now play will always be in key. And of course we can click on these notes, or we can use something like a MIDI keyboard, which I have here today. Now, this project is in the key of C minor. Even if you don't know all the notes in C minor and you've got a keyboard, playing in key mode actually makes it so you can't play a wrong note. For instance, notice how these 2 notes are playing the same? That's because D is in the key of C minor, D flat is not. So it automatically snaps it to an in-key note. So you can essentially play any key on the piano keyboard and it will be in key with your song. Now, what if you don't have a big fancy MIDI keyboard? We can move that out of the way, and you can actually use any QWERTY keyboard, which I have a Bluetooth one here, but the one on your laptop or on your normal computer is just fine. And you'll notice that in the play in key mode, these notes are numbered. So everything we're doing today, you can either play on a traditional piano keyboard or on a normal QWERTY keyboard. It's also worth noting too that you can toggle play in key off and go back to playing chromatically. And that will also make it so the notes on our keyboard go back to chromatic as well. For the purposes of today's tutorial, I'm going to keep everything in key, toggling play in key mode on. It's going to make it super accessible for anybody, no matter what scales you know how to play or that you don't know how to play. It's worth noting that we're going to play all notes that are in the key of the scale of our song, and that's not necessarily true for every song. Your melody does not necessarily have to always be in key, but since we're kind of tailoring this for beginners, we're going to keep it simple and play all notes that are in key today. So the beat we have here is actually a lo-fi beat I made in one of the tutorials that we already recorded. So you should check that out if you're interested in the sound of this beat and recreating it for yourself in Serato Studio. And I'd like to add a melody on top of this. So let's talk about the different elements of melody in the context of this track. So the first thing we can talk about is note length and direction. What do I mean by that? We can play notes short, or we can hold down notes longer. And we can combine short and long. And by direction, what I mean is the melody ascending, or is it descending? And then we can also combine those directions going back and forth. I'm going to minimize this window on the left here so that we can look at our entire 4-bar phrase here. So using just those concepts of direction and playing short and long notes, I'm going to create a very, very basic, simple melody here. Okay, so taking a look at the MIDI for this, you can see that we used a combination of short notes and long notes. And then we also used the combination of ascending melody, the notes going up in direction, and the notes going down in direction. One other thing I want you to notice is that in these phrases, I used all notes that were directly next to each other in key. That goes for these ascending patterns and for these descending patterns. Notes don't always have to be close to each other. We can use leaps instead. And what you'll notice there is I'm actually using a combination of a leap and then consecutive notes. It's good to not have too many leaps in your melody. I think it sounds a little bit better to use leaps sparingly and then also use them with a combination of neighbor notes, consecutive notes. The other thing I'm doing with this pattern is changing the rate. So in this previous melody, the rate stayed the same. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. We can switch up that rate. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So using fast motion and slower motion in combination with leaps. So let's write a new melody that adds the element of using both leaps and neighbor notes, as well as changing up the rate. Okay, so here's a combination of using different rates, and we're also combining it with concepts we already learned, short notes and long notes, as well as direction, and also using bigger leaps. So we notice that these two notes are clearly not consecutive, not right next to each other, nor are these two notes. As you can see right here, big leap. And then we use it in combination with these consecutive notes that all stay right next to each other. Now we can see that the first half of the phrase, the notes are different than this second half of the phrase here. But something stays the same, and that is the rhythm. So using repetition for a single element, either using repetition in the notes of your melody or using repetition in the rhythm of your melody, is something that gives your melody a distinct feel, a distinct sound that's going to be memorable. So even though these two phrases right here are not actually the same, they use different notes, they do use the exact same rhythm. Just another element to think about when writing melodies. How can you use repetition even if you're not repeating the exact same phrase? Of course, you can repeat rhythm, just on different notes. Now, as we start to combine these elements, the note length, the rate at which we play, the relative distance between notes, either they're far away from each other or they're close to each other, the overall direction of the pattern, is it ascending or is it descending? As well as using repetition in things like our rhythm, we can start to make more and more advanced melodies. And one more technique I'd like to introduce you to so we can combine all those different elements in creating an even stronger melody is call and response. Let me show you what I mean. All right, so let's take a look at this. We see elements that we've already discussed, right? We see repeated rhythms, first of all. We see leaps, as well as consecutive or neighbor notes. And now let's break down this concept of call and response. If we look at this as two very distinct elements happening here, we have an opening phrase with three notes that are semi-far away from each other, a leap up, and then downward motion, followed by this little triangle formation, a leap up, downward motion, that triangle formation again. So we can dissect these phrases and call it call and response. Think of it as this is asking the question and this phrase is giving the answer. So even though this phrase here is different than this phrase in notes, it's still the same function, right? Call and response. One thing I'll also note too is you'll notice that as I was playing these melodies on the keyboard, I don't need a full length keyboard here at all. I'm working all with the notes that are semi next to each other, and even the leaps that I'm making are not that far away from each other. I could actually play a lot of these melodies on one hand. And some of the best melodies are the simplest. And especially if you're just starting out, the simpler, the better. And keeping everything in a closer range makes for a more cohesive melody. Of course, you can use the elements we talked about with motion and direction to kind of build up your melody, up the octaves of the keyboard. But if you're just starting out, try to use a closer together collection of notes and create simple melodies at first, and then start to expand beyond using those techniques that we just talked about today. All right, I hope this tutorial was helpful for you in understanding how to write melodies within Serato Studio. I highly encourage you to start writing some of your own melodies using the techniques we used today, but also listen to some of the music that you love and start to notice some of the nuances of the melodies and see how the techniques we talked about here apply to the music you're actually listening to. Don't forget to check in the link in the description for the free offer from ADSR and Serato. And for now, my name is Tetro here for ADSR. Have a good one.